Hello, everybody. I hope you are enjoying Managing Editor Live. Today, I have Albert Qian with me, and we're going to talk about how to create a content strategy to reach your audience where they are. And Albert is the senior content marketing manager at Oracle. He has put together an amazing presentation. So I'm going to get out of the way and let him kick it off because I'm sure we're all going to have plenty of questions for him. I want to see what he is up to. So Albert, welcome. I'm looking forward to your presentation, and I can't wait to hear what our audience has to say about it. So let me just pull that up. And I will see you on the other side.
All
Thank you,
right,
Albert.
wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. And welcome everybody to this session. I'm honored that you've chosen to attend, and I want to thank Managing Editor Live and Flex for having me here today. And so the topic of today's presentation is how to create a content strategy to reach your audience where they are. And so just a little bit of quick about me. As mentioned, in the senior content marketing manager at Oracle, and my focus is on a solution called Oracle Cloud HCM. We are focused on HR, and it's an HR software as a service solution covering everything from global HR to recruiting to payroll and all points in between. As a part of my daily duties as a content marketing manager, I am responsible for the blog, our external and internal newsletter that we send to HR leaders, and the strategy that surrounds it, from being able to organize the content, make it make sense for sales, and so much more, and all points in between as a marketer. As far as where I am geographically, I'm located here in the San Francisco Bay Area. I'm a Silicon Valley native, born and raised, and I've worked at past other companies that you may or may not have heard of, including HP Enterprise and Cisco, both on social media, marketing, and product marketing type functions. And just as a fun fact, my favorite words include defenestrate, miscellaneous, obfuscate, and imbue. And so if you want to connect with me afterwards, I would love to hear what your favorite words are as well. I generally haven't been able to use these words because they are a little bit more obscure, but I hope to integrate them contextually some point, somehow, some way. So that's a little bit about me. Today's agenda, we're going to talk about content marketing strategy and how to stand one up and really how to approach it. And as I was putting this presentation together, one of the things that I was just thinking about was how it goes back to movie references, food references, and so forth. And so as I go through this presentation today, my hope is that not only you'll learn a little bit, but you'll also be a little bit entertained, because, when we make references to mnemonic devices and attach them to concepts that we're learning, it makes the whole entire process a whole lot easier. And in the process too, if you have any questions or if you have anything in the chat, put them in there. I am here to answer those questions and have an ongoing conversation with you. And so the first thing I want to talk about is life is like a content strategy. You never know what you're going to get. And so I think for a lot of us, we know what movie this comes from. It's Forrest Gump. And so content strategy is really interesting because we have so many different channels these days. It's not just writing something, publishing it, putting it out there, and hoping that your audience is going to stumble upon it. It's also not just writing something and being in one framework and hoping that your audience is going to enjoy it either. And so the first point I want to make is that content marketing is malleable in nature. You literally have to throw the kitchen sink at what you do because you have to be able to go where your audience is. If your audience likes to read emails, you write emails. If your audience likes to read long form content, that's what you create. And if your audience enjoys the visual representation of the concepts that you put forth out there, you create infographics. And so what does this have to do with Forrest Gump? Glad you asked. So as Forrest as Forrest Gump and Bubba go through their Vietnam War experience, Bubba goes about talking about how there's different ways to cook shrimp in the shrimping business. He says that as this image says, shrimp is the fruit of the sea. And as you go through multiple scenes within that movie, he says you can saute it, you can fry it, you can bake it, you can boil it, and so forth. And so, how does this relate back to your content strategy? It relates back because, much like any content idea that you have, whether you're writing about a product launch, whether you're sharing your thought leadership around a particular idea, or whether you're just trying to create a really fun branded concept that ties back to your company around a holiday like Christmas or something like July 4th or etc., you have to slice and dice the content in a way that makes sense. And so, like the boiling and the baking and everything in between, you have to look at your content strategy that way too, because your audience is going to consume content differently in accordance to their attention span, the amount of time, and how they integrate their research and reading into their daily lives. Right? We all know that more than three-quarters of business to business executives do their research before they have a touch point with a salesperson. And so, in order to have that effective and optimal interaction prior, you need to be able to create the content and slice and dice and bake your content in a way that is accommodating to them. And so, your audience at the end of the day, they know about content marketing, even though they may not be content marketers, and they will act accordingly as to how they interact with your organization. So when you look at your content, you want to give your content new legs, much like Lieutenant Dan got new legs when he lost them during the Vietnam War in Forrest Gump. And so, to give your content new legs, I want to really approach and discuss this from the perspective of how Oracle looks at our content marketing strategy and how I approach it from a day to day with the HCM software that I support. And so, to create that content strategy, I take a data driven approach, as is kind of the hot buzzword these days, but it's a buzzword that makes sense. And so we use tools like Adobe Analytics, and we collaborate across the company with our various creators and the people who create the content. And whether because I'm just writing, but we also have infographics, and we also work with external vendors. We use tools like Adobe Analytics and other bottom of funnel technologies like Path Factory to analyze what our audience consumes and how they go through our entire buyer's journey, and we create content to match that and support that all the way through. And we use that data to understand the analytics of what our audiences are reacting to, and then based upon that, we form our content marketing strategy. And so, knowing what we've done that over the last couple of years, one thing that we have done, in accordance with being able to slice, dice, bake, boil, saute, etc., our content marketing strategy is that we've ended up creating strategies that circle around what we do on our social media pages, our websites, video, blogging channels, newsletters, and so much more. And as we go through this entire process, we also test how the content performs, and we do regular meetings to sync up and check in on whether we should continue these activities or not. Right? Because after all, if you're also creating content and that content is not resonating, then you also have issues and challenges because then you're essentially you're using worker hours on activities that don't make much sense. And so these all serve as starting points for how customers interact with us and how we, on a regular basis, look at how we interact with them. And so as you go forth and start creating your own organization's content marketing strategy, your questions will differ, but the one big thing to think about is that with the fight for attention, how do you create the right content? Because after all, right, if you have an audience that only reads blog posts and watches videos, that's something of heavy consideration. Whereas if you're a company that is more business to business focused, your deal sizes are a lot bigger, and you're working with people who purchase a lot from you and at one single time, maybe there's a more detailed and refined buyer's journey. And so, as you sit down with your content marketing team and as you sit down with your marketing leadership, it's important to consider how do you create the best content strategy and also make sure that you're not wasting time and reach your audiences where they are, which is, ultimately the top topic of this presentation today. And so, the next piece I want to talk about is thinking about how content is like real estate. And so we talked a little bit about how thinking about it from a high level strategy goes, and this is just diving into a little bit deeper. And the reference I want to make today is to talk about House of Cards. So House of Cards is a great TV show, except for the final season. The final season wasn't great because Kevin Spacey was ultimately booted. And he has a quote in there where he says politics is a lot like real estate. It's all about location, location, location. The closer you are to the source of the power, the more better position that you are. And I'm paraphrasing that last bit there. And so your content marketing strategy is not just about the channels that you create. It's not just about whether you want to be creative and write blog posts or create white papers or create really fancy websites, but it's also about your priorities. Right? We all know that as marketing professionals, we are tasked with the challenge of having to prove ourselves every single day. And that when it comes to organization changes, marketing is what a lot of companies look at first. And so, to create that optimal marketing organization, the biggest thing you must do is to create ways to break down silos with other marketing teams, sales teams, product strategy teams, customer success, and find ways to work together. The closer you are to the source of each of those different areas of power, the more effective you are, because the more positioned you are to create content that matches the needs of what those teams need. So, for example, marketing, as I've experienced in all of my companies that I've worked at so far, often serves as air cover in support of sales. Sales needs to go to market and reach out to prospects and various customers. And what they need to do along the way is they need to create contextual conversations in order for those conversations with their prospects to make sense. And who's creating that content? Well, it's marketing, right? A lot of the time, sales will also go out of their way to create content and assets that will support their conversation too. But many a time, it's also not very effective because they don't have the branding, they are not able to write effectively, and so that's where marketing steps in. And so, as marketers, we have to go in and figure out how to be great networkers and leverage our network and leverage our skill set to be able to create those effective conversations. And so that's a bubbling up effect because at the end of the day, your leadership is also going to like that marketing is very deeply entrenched and aligned and creating products and creating content that people will read versus content that may not necessarily be relevant. And so that proximity to strategy, like I mentioned at the very end, creates power. And this is how exactly we work at it with Oracle. Prior to a couple of years ago when we brought in our chief marketing officer, a lot of what we did in terms of our marketing was very disjointed. We had a head of marketing, but we had very various channels and streams of marketers, even within the same type of product line, like the one that I have, like the one that we work in here, um, that worked very differently. And so there was a lot of content being created, but not a lot of cross collaboration, which led to a lot of duplicate content being created, a lot of confusing conversations for sales folks because they didn't know where to go, and a lot of various different websites where people would go to make sure that they could find the content that they needed to have the best conversations with whomever stakeholders they had. And so after we've reorganized what we've done, we've definitely aligned our priorities closer to what the top leadership wants. And we've also created specific teams in order to make sure that we're marketing as relevant as we can. So what we do is we tie our content strategy to ongoing campaigns, and specifically me being on the HR software as a service campaigns team, which connect back to our industry trends and what we call sales plays as our sales team goes to market. One thing to consider along the way as you develop and create your proximity to power is the importance of flexibility. As you create your strategy, as you align to your organization, your ongoing campaigns, and what your company is looking to do, your strategies can also change depending on those priorities. All right, a lot of us came into 2020, for example, noting that there was a skills gap, noting that there was a big play for employee satisfaction and a play for higher wages. And so we came into 2020 thinking one thing, and unfortunately, COVID hit 3 months later, and we had to change our strategies completely around into topics like workforce health and safety, thinking about how to keep employees satisfied and working remotely, and then later on, and in the last year, we've also been talking about the importance of mental health in the workplace. And while some of these topics have kind of reached their goals in different ways, so for example, employee skilling, which is something that we came into 2020 talking about as a thing, is actually still a thing because in a lot of ways, we have a lot of companies that are trying to keep their employees in something called the great resignation, where many employees are just quitting their jobs to look for better ones. And so as we consider this and as we look forward and look towards it, the important piece is to know that, things like the great resignation, things like major layoffs and all that, or topics that are specific to your industry may absolutely change from time to time. And so being able to be agile and change your strategy and proximity to that power is a big piece because it keeps you relevant. And in a competitive market, such as the market that I'm in, which is HR software, and there's a lot of vendors, how you develop and how you pivot this strategy makes a difference because it changes how you support sales, how your customers perceive you. And that can make a very, very big difference, especially when many companies are vying for just a few customers. And so the big question as you consider your proximity to power is to wonder whether your teams are aligned as you go to market and where that content marketing exists within the conversation. And so if your teams are big, then if your teams are many rather, it's important to think about how exactly you want those teams to align. And if your teams are smaller and you have maybe one or two marketing people in your organization, it's important to see how they align with non-marketing teams within the organization as well to make sure that everybody gets a voice in being able to develop the company brand and make sure that you can reach their audience where they are. And so that comes to the next piece where everything is awesome when you work as a team, right? And so this is the final reference that I'm making in regards to the Lego movie. The Lego movie had a famous song that said that everything is awesome and everything is awesome when you work as a team where you all work towards that one common dream. And the dream here is to be able to reach your audience, understand their pain points, and be able to deliver the right solutions and communicate those solutions so that they end up buying what you have and end up getting the results that they want. And so, when it comes to working as a team, a lot of us we think as content marketers as a silo, as I mentioned in my previous section. We write an asset, we create a web page, we write an email, and it's an amazing piece of content that we have. But unfortunately, we just leave it at that. We don't think much more of it, and we end up letting that asset just sit there, gather dust, and it never sees the light of day after a couple of weeks of it being live and in market. And so, not only do we need to create the asset, but we also need to find out where our audience are and create content to match those audiences, and then share that content broadly to make sure that other teams can see it and that they can use it and that there's a strategy around what it is that we want to accomplish. And so there's a couple of ways to look at this. For larger companies, it's important to be able to delegate the work to specialists who know how to work with the various pieces of content out there, whether it's being able to write it, create video around it, create imagery that supports that piece of content, create social media, and be able to distribute. That's the case here at Oracle, which I'll go into in a moment. For smaller teams, it's important to lean into skilled employees who can do a little bit of everything. And it's also important to delegate as well, whether you're using outside contractors or subcontractors to help create what it is that you need to create. And so our content marketing execution effort is a team activity over at Oracle. I am a singular content marketing manager and content marketing strategist, but on a day to day basis, I'm interacting with our PR team, our social media team, sales, as well as our consulting teams, since we are a company of 135,000, to make sure that their messages are seen and heard by both external and internal people who want to read and understand what we're doing. And our content marketing is a mix of blogs, video, web, infographics, longer form assets, and live events, right? We don't consider live events often as content, but live events are content because you're literally sharing something that people can come back and consume later and learn something from what it is that you're trying to impart. And so we change our strategies as to fit as the market changes. And so, already with my COVID example, that's one thing. Another thing is with, as the COVID-19 pandemic has continued to evolve and HR leaders and priorities change, we've also changed the type of content that we put out to match those challenges as we speak to our customers. And so as a part of this as well, you also have to consider your inclusion in various different campaigns and activities too. And so, as a content writer, sometimes you may feel left out, and it's important to include yourself within the important conversations, even if it's just to be in the know, so that you're able to execute and create what people are looking for. And so the big question here as you consider your content marketing strategy and how you work together as a team is how you create that comprehensive strategy at the end of the day. Right. Whether your team is big or whether your team is small, it's important to understand who you can network with and who you can collaborate with to make sure that everyone gets what they need and that you're able to effectively create that strategy that works across the whole entire organization and send that into the marketplace where your customers and prospects are going to be able to see what you have put together. And so there are questions to ask as you go through this process. Number one, you want to know whether your marketing team is aligned with the rest of the organization. You want to know how your consumers engage with you and what their challenges are. One way to do this is to figure out what your buyer personas are. If they're younger, if they're older, if they have time to read, or whether they need to just focus on visualizing what their goals are. How does our marketing team work together? How many people do you have on your team and what are everyone's strengths? And do you need to be able to delegate? What types of content can we create? Right? There's going back to the very first couple of slides. It's being able to understand that you have to slice and dice your content into different pieces, but more so you also need to be able to understand what it is that your audience is going to read. What channels can we be present on, right? So I know that early on back in the day, it was important to be on all these various different social media channels, if not for just being able to have the have your URL so that you can work on the things that you need, so that you can own those assets. But these days, with some channels being pay to play, some channels changing the way they are, or in the case of some channels, not even being able to be up all day, you have to really consider where you want to spend your time. And sometimes it's your home assets, which is your website and your email, which matter the most because those are things that you can control as the market changes and as technologies change. And then finally, it's important to ask your ability to shift as needed. And so, are you able to pivot if the market changes, on a dime or tomorrow, or do you need a little bit of lead time in order to make that happen when your marketing changes? And so, as we're here asking questions, Claire has a question. She says, how does the length of a sales cycle impact the type of content you put out? And that's a really great question. And so, the sales cycle definitely impacts the content you want to put out because your audience is definitely going to be wanting to know how they can research and what there is to research as you go through your entire content strategy. And so when you think about a content strategy these days, there's top of funnel, bottom of funnel, and middle of funnel. And there's also enterprise technology strategies as well as your shorter term consumer based marketing strategies. And so your content strategy changes with each because your audience will want to know where can they reach what it is that they need to reach in order to where can they go to see what they need to get in order to get the most information necessary. And so I would definitely align your content marketing strategy with the length of the sales cycle because your audience wants to be able to make sure that they can purchase the products that they need to purchase with the most confidence possible. At Oracle, obviously, since our audience spends millions of dollars with us per purchase and pays subscription fees for cloud services, we have a much longer sales cycle that includes everything from blogs right down to product demos and even experimenting with the product live to see what it can do for them so that they know that when they spend that money, they've done their entire due diligence. Good question. So, just some closing thoughts before we move to questions, and we have 4 minutes left here. The final thoughts that I have are that number one, that content marketing strategy is intertwined with the rest of your organization. You know, it's important to be able to create that content strategy and be able to know, like, are we creating various different assets? How are we reaching our audiences? And what is it that our audiences like to consume? Number two, it's that data tells a story and that organizational priorities will tell you what you're trying to achieve. This is important to be in proximity to power and be able to have your content strategy match with what your corporate priorities are so that anyone who wants to see the value of marketing can understand it at any given point. And then finally, it's to differentiate your content marketing by taking care of various channels and content types and being able to work with the teams that you have with you to make sure that they can specialize and help you create that content marketing strategy with their strengths and reach your audiences where they are. And so, with that, I'm open to taking any questions and I'm also open to connecting. Please reach out to me on LinkedIn. You can also check out our publicly facing blog at blogs.oracle.com/oraclehcm. And when you connect with me, tell me what your favorite words to use in writing are. And if you're ever interested in connecting further than that, we can connect virtually or whether we're in the San Francisco Bay Area. And with that, thank you for the pleasure of your time. And I look forward to speaking with you or answering any questions that you may have.
Albert, thank you so much for that amazing presentation. I know we only have 2 minutes left, but can you give your thoughts on what the future of content marketing looks like next year or how you're thinking about it?
Yeah, I think that at a super high level, I think content is getting to the area where it's more personalized. I think if you think about it in line of about how we're now in this virtual event space, how we're all socially distanced, we want to have more relevant conversations, or at least I'm hoping that people want to have more relevant conversations now that connection really means more than ever. And so being able to write persona specific content is going to be important. I think being able to tailor content to specific use cases is going to be even more important. And I think also, and I think that's going to be something that we still integrate in the context of a larger campaign framework that we've always had. But I think personalization is going to be a huge piece.
Excellent. Well, thanks again. If you have any questions for Albert, please email me at tom@repcap.com and I'll make sure we get those answers. And like Albert said, please connect on LinkedIn, share your favorite words. Please join us for the next session, and I really appreciate everyone's time. Have a great day.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody.